Well, thank you much for that very generous introduction. I like to do it Oprah style, so I have to get away from the podium just a little bit. I want to commend Elsa for her presentation earlier. I think it's so important to hear new voices rising and getting an opportunity to be part of what I didn't until recently understand was a quiet group of revolutionaries. So for that, I thank you all for welcoming me into your fold. So I'm Matt Morrison. I'm the Executive Director of Working America, now the 3.5 million member organization of workers who don't have a union on the job. Okay. And we are a canvas organization. We go around the country every night of the week, 365 days a year, and we knock on people's front doors and we talk to them about the economy and where they fit in it. And as a canvas organization, it's incumbent upon me to bring some of the canvas to this room, especially on a Friday afternoon after a long conference. So the first thing that we do whenever we welcome someone into the day in a Working America Canvas office is a clap. So I'm going to ask you to come with me on this. Are you ready? Health action! All right. Is everybody awake now? Okay. So now I'm going to bore you and put you back to sleep. All right. So Working America has had the advantage of doing this work for some 16 years. Like I said, there are 3.5 million working people all around this country who don't have the benefit of a union on the job. Someone came to their door and said the problem with our economy and why the cost of prescription drugs are so high is that the special interests have so much influence in Washington, or insert your state capital. The solution is strength in numbers. If all of us join together, we cannot be denied. That conversation has happened night after night all around the country, and people have started to see their own power in the system. In addition to having that conversation and getting someone to take a political action in the moment at the door, we also test this stuff. We track and measure and analyze what we're doing because we want to make sure that we're changing your opinion, changing your behavior, and galvanizing you into action. And there are lots of lessons to be gleaned from that. But first, let me move to the poll. So I need everyone to pull out their phone. Pull out your phone real quick. Pull out your phone, and the Poll Anywhere app should be loaded up and ready to go. So the first poll question, I want to get a feel for the audience. How many folks in this room have ever had the opportunity to canvass, go knock on the door, and talk to a perfect stranger about an issue? Show of phones. All right. Or as a joke, put your answer into the poll. Okay, so the app has, if you download the Poll Everything app. Okay, A for yes, B for no. All righty, this is working swimmingly, as do most presentations. All righty. Jeff Guerin is coming up in a little bit, and he'll tell you how this feels watching the returns come in on election night. All righty. So we're getting responses? All right, this is pretty good representation. About half of this room has had the opportunity to go and talk to people. One of the things that we find when you go and talk to people is there's far more that unites us than divides us. We were able to capture a little bit of video from the doors. I want to just give you a snippet of what people in Iowa who might have a thing or two to say about the 2020 elections next week, or in a weekend change, had to tell us about what their concerns are around health care. Can we play the video?
The most important issue to me is health shouldn't matter how much money you have, so it doesn't make you more or less deserving of health care.
How is my grandma going to afford her medicine? How am I going to be able to take my children to the doctor if they cut Medicaid?
My personal opinion is if mental health is addressed, we would have fewer issues all the way around.
Yeah. So that's a little bit of a snippet. But what you see in Amy's face, what you see in Rachel's face, is anxiety. It is fear. It is the anxiety that if your child has asthma, as do both of mine, and you have to spend midnights in the children's hospital emergency room, that you're not making choices between that and the mortgage. That you can even get to the hospital in the first place because the bus lines don't run at that time of night. That is the anxiety that people are grappling with, and it's growing. We've had the benefit of being able to look back longitudinally over a set of voters that we've been interviewing for 8 years or so now. And what we see is a trend that is moving in a single direction. And what 1.4 million or so conversations over an 8-year time span, healthcare is consistently on the rise as an area of great concern to the vast majority of swing voters in battleground states. Where is it changing the most? Everywhere. Places like Minnesota and North Carolina, you've seen some of the starkest increases. But Pennsylvania is growing. Ohio is growing. This looks a lot like many of the parts of the rest of the country where the economy has not been able to keep up with people's needs. So which groups of voters are changing the most? One of the things we see is that the trend holds up for everyone, regardless of your partisan ideology. If you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, if you're a moderate, everyone is increasing their anxiety, or everyone's anxiety is increasing about access to health care and health outcomes, I should say. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, the same trend. Age, everyone is moving in the same direction. Although importantly, older voters are far more concerned. Not particularly surprising, but it tells you, the electorate tends to be a little bit older, where is the mood of the country going? I think this perhaps is one of the most telling parts of what the trend is. People with college educations who were once somewhat insulated from the rising cost of healthcare because the occupations and the types of employment they had often have good jobs with employer-provided insurance, don't feel as secure as they once did. They are starting to look and behave a lot more like people without a college education. So what does this look like in terms of the rate of change? There are a couple of other dimensions that are worth looking at. This shows you which income groups have seen the greatest change in their level of concern. Thank you. One of the things I want to note is that higher income workers are the most likely to have increased seen their levels of anxiety increase over this time period. Lower income workers, not so much, but partly because they are already pretty maxed out. So, anxiety is spreading throughout the economy is what that tells us. Geographic distribution. So it's a little hard to see the Twin Cities proper, but if you look at this scale from red to green, what you see is the share of the voters in that given geography that are expressing an intense degree of anxiety about healthcare. If you notice, the pattern tells us that the further you get from the big urban population centers, the more worried you're getting. This is a little counterintuitive to what our current healthcare policy debates look like in this country. So what is the specific concern that's driving this? Shocking, cost. The majority of people that we interview tell us cost and cost-related concerns are the thing that worry them. It's not just, can I get to the doctor? It's, can I choose to go to seek care? And what does it tell us about how people perceive their own personal sense of security? Well, one of the things I think is particularly jarring about this set of results is that if you look at folks' sense of insecurity around being able to afford health care, it's relatively high. But if you look at their sense of their own economic future and their ability to handle their well-being, it's relatively low. People have a sense of optimism about their personal well-being that is inconsistent with their actual lived experiences. So this is a hard emotional question to break through on if you think, okay, I'm fine, but I'm scared as bejesus about this dimension of my life. So what does it mean for 2020? Because after all, this is a health action conference, not a health policy kind of debating conference. One of the things that we see is that what issue you think about as a strong predictor of what your partisan inclination is. Healthcare is second only to education as the most likely framework to shift one's partisan identity more progressive. We see this time after time, state after state. So talking about healthcare, I know there's an effort to get people to share stories. Talk about healthcare and your experience to your neighbors. Spread the word. Keep people personally invested, and you actually have a consequence you will have a consequence on the 2020 election. And we know that this works in some of the most emotionally charged contexts possible. What you're looking at here, and it's kind of a complicated stew, but at a moment when we saw a surge in attention around immigration, immigrant caravans, criminal aliens, et cetera, being driven largely by the president and some of his allies, we were communicating with Working America members about access to affordable health care. And what we see is that if you are hearing from someone you trust about your own well-being, you stay focused on the right stuff. But if you're just caught in the general media ecosystem, the swirl of divisiveness, then it shifts your attention. So talk about healthcare to your friends, your families, your networks, especially this group of community-based leaders around the country would be particularly influential. So what type of solutions are we hearing from voters? So poll anywhere. Pull out your phones again. So the question is, which policy do you think is most popular with voters? Medicare for all, expanding the ACA, or ACHA Trump care? Everyone gets to vote, and we'll watch the tallies come in. I've got 1 minute, so vote quick. No. Quickly, not quick. All righty. Expanded ACA. No Trump care votes so far. I did not see that coming. All righty. All right, and it's knocking. Someone's in the back just messing with me to see if I can. All righty. So there's the poll. I've got news for you folks. Working America does a series of reports called Front Porch Focus Groups. We go out and talk to thousands of voters in their own terms. We just came back from the field, and we'll be releasing a new report on Tuesday of next week. We sampled across 5 battleground states and asked these very questions. What do you care most about? And we went to rural, suburban, and urban communities so we could get a slice of everyone's opinion. Voila. Medicare for all, not so popular, particularly not in the suburbs and in rural communities. It is deeply popular in the urban core. Expanding on the Affordable Care Act is far more popular, except in the urban core. So progressives have something of a conflict on how they speak about the most important issue for the electorate going into this year. But you know what's not popular? Trump care. Only 40%, or less than 40%, of Republicans told us they like Trump care. So let's not fool ourselves. Part of this conversation is about, what did Tip O'Neill say? I'm not running against the Almighty, I'm running against the alternative. Making sure that voters have a very clear contrast on the thing that's most personal to them will shape, I think, the outcome in critical communities in battleground states this year. So with that, thank you.